Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Pricing Guys. I'm Michael,
And I'm Abby.
and today we have our actually big moment, Abby. We have our first guest on the podcast. Today we have Tom Gunter. So Tom has over 40 years experience in FMCG, various roles, executive roles, sales roles, managed very huge brands across North America, Canada, Mexico, the United States. A wealth of knowledge and a lot of insight that he can provide us into what he's seen over his 40 plus years in FMCG, what works, what doesn't work, and what are things to kind of watch out for.
I actually worked with Tom whilst he was president of ConAgra, and currently he's the vice chair for the board of directors on the Grocery Foundation. So he's going to have a lot of interesting insights to share today. So we've got a couple of hard-hitting questions for Tom and look forward to getting his take on things. So maybe we start with a tough one for you. What do you see as the biggest BS you still hear passed off as a strategy in the CPG world?
Well, I would say, it's a bit of a difference between corporate world and private enterprise world. In the corporate world, the sad thing is the people closest to the action and knowing what's going on are quite often held hostage to decisions that are being made somewhere else. And they're not really in a place where they can debate what the strategy is or the game plan. And the unfortunate thing is, I mean, I see what's happening right now in Canada as an example, where you have, whether it's European or American based companies are really dumbing down Canadian operations. They're taking a lot of the heart and soul out of Canada. And, the part for me that I think is BS is that, we had so many differences between us and the US, whether it's, regulatory, whether it's culturally, metrics. We had big geography to cover. We have pretty darn consolidated industry, private labels even more dominant. We have French language, we have currency differences, and yet we yank everything out of Canada and say, "Yeah, we could do this out of another country." And I know in today's world that's probably easier to do because we have such great technology, but still, the knowledge and the experience in the market is not present, and because of that, you're not attracting the best talent anymore into this industry, especially in the food and packaged goods. It's the jobs are being reduced to the point where you're kind of a glorified sales leader more than anything else. And not that I have anything bad to say about sales because I came from it myself, but people are the really great talent now out in Canada is going into other industries because that's where there's a lot more meat. So that's just one that I think as far as BS strategy is really chopping out a lot of the heart and soul out of the Canadian market.
So building on that and moving the other way, what would real growth leadership look like to you?
Um, well, I think real growth leadership in my mind is surrounding yourself with an A team of experts, and I really think you have to do your homework on research. The challenge is most research, there's a lot of research spent on looking at history and looking at, whether it's Nielsen data or whatever you want to look at, but we're not really looking forward to seeing where the trend's going to take the business. And I do think that if you're really looking to take advantage of future growth, you got to look at demographic shifts, you got to look at cultural shifts, um, and even the fact that consumer choices. I mean, there used to be a time when you could actually market something to everybody. Of course, this is not new news. You can't anymore. That the market is so segmented, so you got to make sure that you're focused on something you can win at, either because you're innovative and you're servicing a new opportunity. For example, one that I think, because I thought you bought the product, isn't in the food segment, but it's in the shoe industry where you have Skechers with their new shoes where you can actually just slip your foot right in there. And you don't have to, for somebody who's in the aging population, I'm one of them, it's so handy. And nobody else was doing that. So now they have a product that has broad appeal that's in a new segment. They don't have to go into a price war. So I really think growth leadership is looking at where's the unserviced opportunity in the marketplace.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, Tom, because I think like in traditional consumer goods, I think, and we talked about a little bit last year on the podcast, is we're seeing a lot of people go into like the buy mode, where like true innovation, I'm not sure it exists in a lot of companies anymore. Like we see a lot of stuff like I take the same product and I change the flavor a little bit, and that's like my big innovation for the year. But very, very few companies are like truly innovating, building new brands. And it seems to be more of a, I'm going to go buy it and staple it onto my portfolio
Right.
as opposed to build it. But it's interesting because I think about like what's happening with some of the big brands. Now you see some of these big conglomerates are actually de de-investing, right? They're separating into smaller, companies as well. So, like, really interesting trend over the last kind of decade or so that I think is out there.
Well, food is especially difficult. I can see why Procter and Gamble and Unilever, and to some extent even Nestle, are reducing their reliance on food. Like P&G is totally out of food now. Unilever's getting smaller and smaller on food. It just doesn't travel well, and it's being victimized by so many trends and people having different preferences, whether it's vegan, vegetarian, gluten free. You can go on and on with the list. It's really hard to go that broad. There are some companies that do a good job of taking a big business and my point is always take a big brand and do something of significance to add value to it. That's going to be big.
Yeah.
But barring some of these smaller companies, the big mistake a lot of these companies do is they buy these ones up and say, hey, these guys are innovative. It's an innovative product. It's not in our portfolio. They buy it. Then the product's retired in about 2 or 3 years because they haven't got the ability to focus on it anymore. The person who owned that brand, they were really focused on it because that was their heart and soul. That's all they had. And it was their baby. This was at a big company. You don't have that focus.
I remember one time it was, we saw a big company and they bought like a pretty niche brand. And I remember sitting with like the guy who was heading up marketing and he was so excited. He's like, we got this brand. It was like a big incumbent, like they've been stealing the market share. And he's like, we need to have a work session to redefine the identity of the brand. And like, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, hold on a second. You just bought this brand because it was beating you up in the market and it was winning against all your other brands. And now that you have this in your portfolio, you're going to completely change it and do something very, very different. And it was interesting because we've kind of followed the brand and the company, and it took probably like 5 years to stabilize after like, they made some crazy changes, did some stuff. And after about 5 years, they finally went back to like what was working and they were able to kind of stabilize. But it's really interesting seeing like just the mentality of some of those big organizations who, haven't been able to innovate, but yet they think that they're still better at innovating than maybe the smaller guys.
Well, I mean, I'm sure Abby would have something to say about this because I think there's two ways to go here. Either stay in your lane and get better at what you do well, or if you really believe that, your lane's leading to the land of destruction and you want to go into some other business, you better make sure you know who the players are and whether you have the ability to win in it. And if you don't, what do you need to do? You need to make some serious changes to compete. And I don't know. I mean, there's so many examples out there of failed strategies and people sticking to their knitting. I mean, comments like we're just gonna lean in more next year.
Yeah. No, 100%. Like, as I'm reflecting on what you're saying, Tom, like, the biggest BS you were talking about kind of pulling out resources so we're further from the market, the research, we need to be closer to the customers. Like a lot of these trends that you're talking to, it's all about what we focus on pricing, right? More segmented we get, the more targeted we get. That's where all of the volume gains are had and where all the profitability gains are had, right? So it's really interesting kind of the trends that you're focusing on. Um, as you think about like, a lot of people are saying we're facing some headwinds now, whether it be tariffs, inflation, bit of volume downturn, and everyone's kind of thinking about how their supply chains going to shift or they need to shift it. What's one uncomfortable truth you find that CEOs kind of need to avoid when they're facing a downturn, or what's kind of the uncomfortable truth that no one wants to address?
And the one that was really recent that I just couldn't. I mean, I knew this was going to happen, but is when we had the COVID. We had to pick the pandemic, and some categories like cereal and numerous others took off like a rocket. Mainly because people were staying home and it was convenient and has great shelf life and everything else. So people just went back to what they weren't in transit anymore. Uh, so what happens? I mean, you know what happens? All the big cereal companies figure, hey, this is a new consumer trend. Once to get out of the pandemic, what else can we do? We think we could keep this double digit growing for a while. And, you just knew that wasn't going to happen. I mean, there's some consumer trends that changed, yes, but there were many, especially, eating habits that were temporary. They just kind of it interrupted the trend that was happening. And I think part of it is the tough thing for a CEO, especially in a major public company, is to actually admit the truth on some of these things. They got to keep the brave face up there for the stock value. And, that's the reality. And that's why I think a lot of food companies or stock values getting hammered these days because private companies have a bit of an upper hand. They don't need to go to the street. They can make decisions that are farther out. They're not worried about just hitting a quarter. And I got to tell you, I was very fortunate to work for a family company in my last almost 4 years of my career because it felt great in a lot of ways. It was different, but it felt great that we weren't worrying about doing silly things to make a quarter or making big promises saying, "Oh yeah, we're going to like grow double digits again next year," and not only that, we're going to double digit our profit. It's just it's too bad, but CEOs are just trying to hang on to keep their job for another year or two.
It's interesting, you say that because a lot of times when we engage with a client, we will look at the trends that are happening and we'll like have the entire executive team there and we'll say, hey, this trend, do you feel that this is kind of structural? Like this is a long ongoing trend? Or is this kind of tactical? Like if we change our offering or we change the pricing or we change our go to market, that we can kind of shift it around. And it's amazing what kind of like there's so much difference of opinion on what's structural versus just tactical things that we can actually control. It's kind of wild that you would never expect like a leadership team to be this misaligned at the end of the day in terms of what you're trying to achieve.
It's true. I think a lot of them have gut instinct and not enough aren't looking at the facts enough. I mean, you know this firsthand. That's what you do, right? But I used to get I used to get incredibly frustrated that I could present the facts till I was blue in the face. So like an American parent, and yet they said, "Well, that's not good enough. We need to do this." Well, you know, guess I need to knock on people's doors and get them to buy this product at a higher price because I know they're not going to. But how else am I going to convince them, right? So I don't know. And you just know what the outcome's going to be, and then you're burning the furniture two quarters later because they didn't want you to commit to what you said you could do. And you probably would have done better if you had gone in eyes wide open and said, "Hey, we're going to suck in the first two quarters, so we're going to hunker down. We're going to cut spending here. We're going to put a freeze here right out of the gate. And when we think things start to move in the right direction, if we can get that to happen, then we can start opening it up again." But we never seem to do that. It's always like, everybody comes out of the gate flying. We gotta have a fast start. There's another line.
Yeah.
Fast start, and then by about 3 months in, by April, you're
And then we need to lean in, right? After we get
deleted. Yeah.
And then that leads up to a quick finish. We have to have a strong finish or something.
Mhm.
Yeah. But I think that's an interesting point, Tom, that you bring up because I don't think I've ever thought about it that way that, when you're making decisions at that most senior level and maybe they're not baked as much in reality as they should be, like the downstream effects. And what's the alternative that you could have done and you could be in a much better spot. It's an interesting way of thinking about it, but I don't think enough CEOs or enough people generally in business think about, what is the alternative and what can happen. But I think it's a really strong and powerful exercise to go through and say, yeah, maybe we are going to suck and we need to hunker down and do these things. But at the end of the day, we're going to end up in a better spot.
So I want to close on one item here, Tom. You talked a lot about where companies should be putting investment to make sure that they're getting closer to the consumer, really understand the market opportunities, understand where they can offer true value. What advice would you give to CEOs out there in 2025 on this as an area that you probably shouldn't be spending budget on? and you probably have some opportunities. Without hesitation, here's where you can probably find some savings.
Well, first of all, I probably wouldn't have said this 10, 15 years ago or 12 years ago, but I wouldn't hire more people, number one. I do believe that, you got to hire better people and you got to get the best people possible. But with things like AI and technology today, you don't need to have as many people. And again, this comes from my 4 years in the private sector where we were lean. Like we were incredibly lean and we were growing double digits every year. And it could be a little harrowing at times, but I mean, we delivered a quality product. Our customer satisfaction was good. There's always opportunities, but you had to you had to sign up for growth or vastly improved profit to pay out the person you were going to have. And I think the first place people go quite often is we need to add somebody. We need to add a couple of people. So I would say that don't add more people. Number two, don't add more square footage for your office. Kind of goes hand in hand. People want to work from home anyway. Well, that's starting to change again. The other one is just trade. It's so easy to say don't spend more trade, but the trade's awfully mighty out there. But even trade that today has definition, tomorrow won't. And I've seen all of these things like exclusivity deals or preferred agreements or whatever it happens to be, or space agreements that may have happened in year one, but by year three, the performance is gone, but the money's still in the retailer's pocket. And I don't blame them for that. You have to be on top of them constantly to make sure they're performing for the dollars you're spending. And if you're not, then shame on you. But I think execution and measuring execution to the upteenth degree is critical. You need to know, I know Nielsen could provide some of that, but there needs to be a picture of how your stores look. I was spoiled from my days at Frito-Lay where we had direct store delivery and we were in the stores constantly. But that's what great looks like, in terms of execution. So making sure you're getting what you're paying for is pretty critical. So I don't know what else I would say here. I mean, something else was just line extensions. I would save your money. You're not going to get more shelf space. And you think you're wrong. And I used to always bother the guy I won't mention his name, great guy actually, but he used to run Wrigley before Mars bought it. And I was a big fan of their peppermint Excel gum. And every time I went to a store, it was out of stock. It was always out of stock. Well, they had these 8 other flavors that were there. They were hardly even touched. And I kept telling him, I said, do you want an easy growth play? He goes, what's that? I said, take about 3 times the space on peppermint, get rid of your 2 or 3 lowest sellers, and you're going to get incredible growth. And I started sending him fixtures. I'm like, camera, I go in, there it is, out of stock again. And I tell him the store. And so I did the same thing with Richard Glover when he's running Pepsi, because my white boys like decaffeinated diet Pepsi, never in stock. It was always out of stock. They had lime, they had cherry, they had everything else. So I just think plain old execution and making sure how your products show up in the store, that you're simply giving the space to the items that sell the most, space to sales. It's an old concept. But we don't stick to our guns on execution, and I think that's a big gap.
I think that I'll really pause on that point because it's huge on these line extensions, because the amount of mind share, even internally, that they take from the team to how we're going to launch this, how we're going to position it, the sales targets we're going to put around it, and the funding that we take off the base and put into that. It's a huge investment that sometimes
Not to mention the cannibalization, new slotting fees, nuisance fees, like the amount you're paying for it, right? And the return that you're getting. And all in all, it's not sure the ROI is there.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, so you gave us a lot to think about today. Thank you so much, Tom, for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Oh no, my pleasure. I always have something to say about the food industry. I wasn't perfect when I was out there, but I learned a lot in the process. So
Thanks for sharing it with the audience.
all right,
Thanks
Take
a lot,
care.
Tom.
all right. Have a great day.
You too.